Imagine a world where bypass surgery no longer means a 6-inch scar or more down your chest, cracked ribs, months and months of painful recovery. Sounds great, right? Imagine bypassing a blocked heart artery through nothing more than a tiny puncture in the groin, the same way we fix a simple blockage in the leg arteries. Well, for the millions in the Zipper Club who have survived open heart surgery, this sounds like a dream. But a groundbreaking team from the NIH and Emory University has just made it a reality with a world first procedure called Vector. It is the first fully catheter based coronary bypass in history. And if you're listening to us live or watching on YouTube, you're about to meet the lead author of that study. Now, this Vector procedure officially signals the beginning of the end, I think, of the Zipper Club. Welcome to the Heart of Innovation. I'm Kym McNicholas, and joining me today is interventional cardiologist Dr. James Joye, who invented the minimally invasive bypass for the legs known as PTAB, now distributed by Endologics. And I'm curious his insight into bringing this technology now to the heart. And he is co-hosting Pinch Hitting for our regular host, Dr. John Phillips, who is out saving some piggies. But both Dr. Joye and I are honored to welcome the man who just helped open a new frontier in cardiac care, Dr. Chris Bruce. But before we get to him, Dr. Joye, it is so good to have you here. And I bet it's really cool to hear that what you've done now in the legs is on its way to the heart, right?
It is extremely exciting, and my mind is still a little bit blown trying to comprehend the sequence of events that led to it, the technique. I'm really looking forward to hearing how this came about and how they pulled it off.
Me too. Welcome, Dr. Bruce. Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on this huge milestone.
Hi, and thank you very much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to talk about it. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of heartache and experimentation to get it to where it was. And, I'm only one part of a bigger team as well. I want to emphasize that, obviously. But yeah, it's great to be here, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Before you bring us back to the beginning, a coronary bypass has meant a zipper scar and just months of recovery. Does this Vector procedure officially signal the beginning of the end for the Zipper Club?
I would love to think so, but we're very early on. This was done for a specific purpose, and we probably get into that in conversation. If you think back to people putting transcatheter heart valves in patients 15, 20 years ago, people probably thought they were a little bit crazy and on the edge, and now it's mainstream in most hospitals worldwide. So I don't know where it's going to go in 15 or 20 years, but it's nice to think that it might start some sort of deviation, or at least inspire other people to get creative and think about how we can make this a procedure for more than just the very, very sick with no other options.
So there was a very specific reason for this. Would you go into detail on that? What was that reason that this was created, and go into exactly what was created?
Of course. Well, first off, I think a little bit of background with the NIH and the Emory collaboration. Over the years, it's been very fruitful, bringing ideas for complex medical conditions that there are no good commercially available options. People who, talking back to the first thing that was invented from the lab that was translated into clinical practice was transcaval aortic access for TAVR, where a wire was burned from the IVC into the sidewall of the aorta to deliver the valve. That kind of signaled the start of a revolution between, finding people with no options, thinking of the clinical problem, and then thinking of a solution to try and make that work. We did the same with this. Bringing
this back to the layman. So can you break that down for the average patient that's out there that may want to relate to what you're saying, but doesn't understand the clinical speak?
Yeah. So transcatheter aortic valve replacement, or TAVR, is a valve that's put inside an old valve without removing it, put up from the legs, and they're large tubes. So we need at least some runway to get the tubes up to the heart. So people need to have patent and large enough arteries in their legs. And some people didn't have that. So we thought, well, if they don't have that and they're not good for other forms of access, how can we do it? So we put it up through the vein, which is a tube that lies right beside the artery, but it doesn't get affected by the same disease processes. And that allowed a route to the heart that wasn't traditional and got lots of people out of a sticky situation. In the context of vector, we had a similar thing where someone was really struggling with a valve that had been replaced surgically in the past that was not doing its job anymore. It had become severely narrowed, and that needed replaced, or we know that the patient would just have continued to decline and ultimately died of that condition. In order to put that valve in, well, the first thing is we always see these patients and think, should they have surgery again? All right. So you talk about the zipper club, is zipper number 2. And that's a big surgery. And some patients are just too sick to have it. They'll die on the table essentially if we try. So then we move to the less invasive option where we pop a new heart valve inside the other one, as I just described, up from the leg vessels. But in this patient's case, by doing that, we push the leaflets of the old valve out of the way like trapdoors. And unfortunately, those trapdoors were going to block the coronary arteries on both sides, or in this patient on the left side. So if that happens, there's no blood flow to the heart. You get a massive heart attack and essentially have a 100% mortality on the table without heroic actions. So we knew that, and there are several techniques, again, invented between the NIH and Emory, where we can cut the leaflet, the old leaflet, just down the midline. So instead of being a trapdoor, it's now a window. But again, this patient didn't have that option because the leaflets were so chalked up with calcium that we wouldn't have been able to perform that procedure or other procedures that get him out of trouble. So he really was a patient with no options. So in talking about the patient, the idea came, well, if we're going to block the artery, why don't we just move it out of the way? So that was kind of the first idea of where we went with vector. We were going to take the old artery and move it up.
And coming up next right here on the Heart of Innovation, we're going to hear more from this very first case of vector and get Dr. Joye's thoughts as well. That's next right here on the Heart of Innovation on KDOW. Don't go away. Okay. Dr. Joye.
Yes.
Would you like to take us back from break and just say, welcome back? We're talking to Dr. Chris Bruce, and then bring us up to speed and lead them into where we are?
Happy to.
Okay. When you're ready.
All right. So we don't have a time in between. We're just going to go.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Just whenever you're.
How many more breaks are we having? By the way, I didn't realize we were going to have a little interlude.
It's live for the duration. We're live right now. Still, so nothing's off the record. We let everyone in on our behind the scenes. It's going to run on the radio, not this Saturday, the next Saturday, and I'll get you links. But there are 5 segments. We have one more segment that's 8 minutes, a 6-minute, a 9-minute, and then a 4-minute.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Ready when you are, Josh. Three, two. Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation, Dr. Jim Joye. Pleased to be with Dr. Chris Bruce as he talks about this new vector procedure. We were just kind of getting into the heart of it, pardon the pun. And he was describing some techniques that were used along the way that may have led him to this. I was mentioning to Kym earlier that in our development of a similar, less critical procedure in the lower extremities, way back when 20 plus years ago, this actually started as a coronary venture. And there was an old procedure with an acronym that doesn't matter named PICVA. And basically we're trying to bypass coronary arteries without opening the chest then by going into the arteries to complete blockages, punching out the side of the artery wall into the adjacent cardiac veins and trying to go around them and reestablish flow downstream. And this was worked on for many years and ultimately was not successful. I think one patient made it for a while, but ultimately succumbed to their disease. So I'm very excited to hear about this alternative technique, which really fits my mind better because it mimics in a lot of ways what we've done with the legs.
So how exactly is it different? I'm not clinical, so bring us kind of up to speed here, or maybe should I say break it down for us?
Yeah, so I mean, my understanding of the difference is very clear, which is, rather than as we do in the lower extremities where we use the adjacent femoral vein to go around the problem, here they've simply created a brand new orifice off the aorta. So, for the lay people that are watching, our coronary arteries arise from the base of the aorta just above the heart, right by the aortic valve that Dr. Bruce was trying to repair. And we do encounter this sometimes when you put in a TAVR or a percutaneous valve. The valve can actually cover the origin of the coronary artery and obstruct flow. So in this case, he created an amazing technique to simply move the origin of the left coronary artery, the left main trunk, higher in the aorta. So it would be above the valve that he was putting in, but still connect to the artery and preserve flow to the heart.
Wow. That's pretty incredible. What was it like? What was the discussion like, Dr. Bruce, with you and your team? How did it go? Did someone call you and say, we have this patient, we don't know what to do. Do you have any thoughts? Or you guys had already been talking about this?
No, yeah, each of these come up in different ways. So the team that we're talking about at Emory, Adam Greenbaum, Vasilis Babliaros, and at NIH, Dr. Robert Letterman, who runs the structural heart program. We were talking, and I remember it was a Saturday morning, and Robert called me and he said, "I've just come off the phone with Vasilis, and we're going to move the coronary artery." And I was like, "Okay, sure." And then obviously we talked for a short period of time.
Yeah, because we do that every single day, don't you? I mean, seriously.
Yeah, through an open chest you do, but not through a catheter.
Yeah, and we talked for a minute about, sort of brainstorming how we might go about doing that. And then we have a very luxurious setup at the NIH where we talk about something on a Saturday, and by Monday morning I can be in an animal lab trying the techniques out and coming up with a way to do it. And that's key in getting this safely as a first in human procedure on a practice of medicine basis. Remember, this isn't any research. We're just helping someone who's in a sticky situation, and we're using tools that are available, just off-label. So yeah, I went through the process of iteration in the animal lab at the NIH, and once the technique was kind of ironed out in its stepwise fashion, we took all the patient's information, the patient scan, analyzed it, came up with a very detailed plan about how we would approach it, and then got to work down at Emory on a relatively long procedure day to make it work first in human.
Out of
Wow.
curiosity, Chris, how long did this procedure take start to finish?
We were in the lab, so going to talk through in kind of lay terms as much as I can, but
yeah,
we obviously were doing this closed chest and on a beating heart, but there are ways that we can support the circulation of patients to potentially reduce the risks. And one of those was putting the patient on a form of bypass called ECMO. Obviously, they need anesthesia, they need prep. So there was a lot of kind of steps before we even got going with Vector itself. But we were in the lab, or the patient was in the lab for about 7 or 8 hours in total. The procedure itself took us about 5.
All right.
Wow. And so walk us through the conversations that were happening that morning. So you went straight from animal to human, literally right then and there. This was your very first case. Were there any surprises in the process going from one to the other?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest surprise. So I never want to walk into a procedure, and neither do the guys down at Emory. We always think through all possible eventualities. What if this happens? What are we going to do? What if this happens? What are we going to do? Just so that we kind of have every piece of equipment that we think we might need on hand in the lab. So we were all pretty relaxed, to be honest, going in by the time we did it. The only unknown really was the fact that we were operating in someone who had had surgery previously. And when that happens, when the surgeon opens the chest and opens the lining of the heart called pericardium and does all their work, when they close it all back up, the pericardium gets really stuck down in ways that you can't really predict. You know, there are going to be areas, we call them adhesions, where the pericardium sticks to the surface of the heart, but we don't know where they're going to be. We don't know how extensive they're going to be, but it makes operating within that space a little more unpredictable than it was in the animals, who are all young, healthy, naive pigs with no adhesions or few adhesions. So that was the only unknown, but we kind of had techniques to identify where those adhesions were and to try and work around that.
In some
Coming up
respects,
next right
that can
here
be
on the
kind of,
Heart of Innovation. We're going to go to break, and then we'll let you finish that thought in just a moment. So stay with us right here on KDOW. Don't go away. Okay. Dr. Joye, sorry to cut you off. I looked at the
no
time and
worries.
got concerned. So go ahead, bring us back and go where you were going to go.
All right, 3, 2. Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. Again, we're talking with Dr. Chris Bruce about the new vector procedure. And we're just kind of talking through the transition that he went through from doing this in an animal lab to all of a sudden the first human. And as one who's been through that process, there are all kinds of emotions, anxieties, and excitement to finally realize what you've worked so hard on and iterated on. We were talking about, the fact that there's obviously differences between an animal and a human, and one of the things in this particular patient had already had surgery. I'm wondering, Chris, historically we've always kind of felt that there was a little bit of safety net when we're working in patients that have been operated through open heart surgery before because of these adhesions, because if wires or balloons or stents were to create a rift in the artery, those adhesions can sometimes prevent a catastrophe that might happen in someone who has a normal lining of the heart, where they might bleed significantly. And since you were obviously planning to poke through things and create connections that aren't normally there, I wonder if that was maybe a little safety net in your mind as you were going through this.
It was. I mean, we had that scenario where if the patient bled, would it be contained by the adhesions and we'd be okay? We also had that less exciting scenario where, well, if it bled in this area and locally compressed the left atrium and, that one heart chamber selectively, how could we get at it in order to drain that off? So, we had both trains or both thought processes, and the main thing is, and we'll get into the technique in a little more detail, I'm sure now, but one of the main steps is to puncture out of the left main retrograde, so going backwards into the pericardium, and the other one is to puncture out of the aorta going forwards and into the pericardium, and we have to make those two wire tracts meet within the pericardial space. So it was more anxiety over how we were going to make the two wires meet if there were adhesions in that area, but it worked out.
Obviously. So this is maybe a little technical, but I'm understanding you to say that both punctures ultimately, and you're trying to make a connection between the two. So coming out of the aorta, coming out of the coronary artery, wires that you're advancing to try to connect to each other are ultimately in the pericardial space, in the space between the lining of the heart and the organ itself.
Correct.
So you're not in the chest.
No, you know, one of the beauties in a way of this procedure is that you can use the natural runway of the coronary as it comes back to the aorta, to kind of understand where that exit is going to be, and then line it up with pre-procedure planning on the CT to define where you're going to exit the aorta, so that hopefully both are in relatively close proximity, so you're not going swimming around all over the place trying to make these two meet. I think one of the things of being a structural interventionist is that you're also kind of an expert in reading CTs, even though we don't get paid for such. So you know, all of our planning is on very detailed CTs, and the CT scans are phenomenal these days. I'm sure you know. You know, you can plan your projection angles, you can plan vessels going this way or that way. So that was, you know, part of the main unknown was how we were going to make those two meet.
I think it would be beyond the comprehension of most of our audience, and most doctors for that matter, to understand each and every step of what you did. I know we're going to come to a close on this session, but very curious to, once you get to the point where you've got an exit from the artery, an exit from the aorta, how you connected the two.
Yeah. So the exit from the aorta was electrosurgical. So similar way to what I just described with transcaval access, we connect the guide wire to an electrosurgery generator and just burn straight out of the aorta. Retrograde, I used CTO type techniques to mechanically push out of the aorta. In the aortic exit, then we push a catheter through the wall of the aorta with a snare inside. And then it's that snare that grabs a hold of the other wire and pulls it in.
So you ultimately have to be in close proximity, and then you're guiding the wire through the coronary artery into the snare.
Correct.
Fantastic.
Well, coming up next right here on the Heart of Innovation, it sounds like it's risky business. We're going to find out just how risky it is and what could have happened if the patient did not have this procedure, and thank goodness all went well, but what could have gone wrong? We'll find out next, and how the patient's doing. Coming up right here on the Heart of Innovation on KDOW. Don't go away. Okay. This is our long segment. Yeah, I just would love to get into the riskiness kind of it and the options, and then how widely of, I guess this is just one. If anyone else is doing it, what are the next steps? How the patient is doing, all that stuff. So, however you see us flowing, Dr. Joye, you're up to bat.
All right. Very good. All right. 3, 2. All right. Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. Dr. Jim Joye with you, and with Dr. Chris Bruce, talking about the new vector procedure, where basically what was once open heart surgery has now been performed through a catheter and a non-opened chest. And we're kind of getting to the point now where we've gone into some of the details of how this can be performed. Curious, Dr. Bruce, kind of the risks that you kind of programmed for as you went into this. We talked a little bit about, you know, what happens when you get into the lining of the heart. I'm curious, you know, what if you couldn't connect the two and you're left with a catheter hole in the aorta? How would you have kind of backed out of that maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the complications, shall we say, that we were planning for, we have many devices, as you know, that plug holes, and having a catheter out there or a sheath makes that very easy. So we can just find a device that's, again, made for something else and deliver it to the wall of the aorta. That was going to be the harder bit. The beauty of the technique coming out of the coronary artery. So not to get too technical, but first of all, we access going downstream like blood is intended to flow. We make a connection whereby we can then work back upstream. So we're going against the flow of blood, and push out of the coronary artery in that direction. So if we pull that wire, and it was one of the things when I was practicing or experimenting early in the animals, it didn't go well for a couple of procedures, as you imagine. I would be in there for 4 or 5 hours trying to make this connection work, trying to understand what I needed to do. And I could just pull the wire out, and the animal was absolutely fine. There was no complication because the seal, the flap, because we were going against the flow of blood, just got pushed closed when the blood came back in the normal direction. I also used, after iteration, a stent. So what we normally do to open up blocked arteries, it's a little metal cage and it gets expanded against the wall of the artery. That was already in place. So we kind of had the treatment already planted before we made the exit from the vessel. You know, another thing, and we talked about it, there's a potential for bleeding. That did happen at one point in the procedure, bleeding into the lining of the heart, into the pericardium, and we had to pop a needle in and drain that off. But again, expected. We reacted very quickly to that and sorted it out. But there's always unexpected things. Thankfully, none of those happened. The expected complications and unexpected complications slightly different, but we got the bleeding under control, and then the vector graft, so to speak, is just a covered stent. Again, something that we use to cover these holes that we make in the arteries whenever we're working in normal procedures, and we connect that from the aorta to where we came out of the coronary artery, and it acts like a little bridge and bridges the gap between the two. But we weren't certain that it was all going to take and that the flow was going to be brisk, etc., until we actually put the heart valve in at the end. Because in order for the graft to stay open, we needed there not to be any normal flow through the normal route. So after we put the valve in and the doors got shut, then it was quite reassuring to see good blood flow down into the coronaries through the graft, despite, you know, us having blocked it as predicted.
So a lot of
So it
things that
sounds,
you had to kind of calculate in advance. I mean, you're now putting a fairly rigid stent graft from the aorta into an artery. You know, usually when we use these, we're putting them in the artery and everything just kind of moves with the heart. But now you've kind of got the separation of an aorta that doesn't move very much and a heart that's beating. So I'm sure you had to calculate for the length of the grafts, how much overlap, how far you go into the artery. I mean, that was all kind of science made up out of nowhere, right?
in a short amount of time too.
Yeah, intuition, science, I don't know, clinical experience, a lot of people to lean on. You know, again, I can't say enough about the guys at Emory, Adam and Vasilis and Robert as well. You know, all of these things are thought out extensively before we go in there. We had the same concerns, interestingly, though. And when you look at it on a CT scan, the aorta and the left main don't actually move that much in relation to each other. It's kind of from below there. The rest of the heart rises and falls. The right coronary is slightly different, especially if it comes up, something we call a shepherd's crook. It can kind of move quite dynamically. But thankfully, we were doing this on the left side for the first time. And we did overestimate the length of stent that needed. We put another stent in the aorta or extended to the aorta just in case it migrated. The one in the coronary, we anchored in place with an open stent, extending it down into the big artery called the LAD on the front of the heart. And we did have to be careful as well in planting a covered stent that we didn't cover the second artery on the left-hand side called the circumflex, which goes to the side. And we had strategies that we were prepared to employ if that had happened as well. But with all that planning, we did land it where we were meant to. We managed to anchor it in both sides, and it didn't move, at least up to the latest follow-up.
I'm curious in terms of the patient, the conversation with the patient about this procedure. Was this was their only option? What would you have done if they said, no, I think that the risks outweigh the benefits?
As with everything, it's a shared decision making. We are, as physicians, just an opinion. We give our opinion to the patient, and it's their body, their decision. They ultimately decide. But as I'm sure we've experienced, there's this kind of right patient, right time thing, and some people are, we can't progress in medicine without the patients. They are phenomenal. They are the reason this works. They're the reason that we can move forward. And their willingness to accept risk, willingness to know that they're the first person ever to have this procedure done, you
And that they
cannot
had the
thank them
procedure
enough
basically invented for
for them.
their particular case.
Correct. Correct. But, the patient was phenomenal. After a lot of lengthy discussion, it was, again, Adam Greenbaum's patient in Emory, and he's been through this process several times of first in human procedures. So he is the master of consent, and they know exactly the risks before they go into it. And, with his explanation and the options on the table, the patient, decided to go ahead with it. The other option, as you mentioned, is just medical therapy and palliation.
And so, how is the patient doing now? How long ago was the procedure? What is the prognosis for this patient?
Yeah, well, this procedure was approximately a year ago now. The patient, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but not related to a complication of this. He, as if anybody's read the paper, there were a lot of other things going on that were life-limiting in the longer term for him as well. So, but when he passed away from other issues, there was no sign of any heart attack or ischemia or anything from the things that we did, which was of some reassurance after
Any
9 or 10 months.
any possibility of naming it in the future after him?
Yeah,
Honor
we
his
love an acronym. We've moved away from eponyms, I think, so we're going to stick with the acronym. But it's
going
a
up
nice
next right
thought.
here. Yeah, definitely. We, when patients give of themselves, for science, for future, it's incredibly selfless. Well, coming up next right here on the Heart of Innovation, we'll see where this technology and this case takes us. That's next right here on the Heart of Innovation on KDOW. Don't go away. So we have literally 4 minutes, and it's a hard stop. Music comes in at 3 minutes 30 seconds. And so kind of just watch the chat if you can, but would love to hear kind of where is this going? Are we talking more of these types or are we talking coronary, like full, blockage in the artery, bypass there? I'm going to let Dr. Joye, you take us back, and if you guys want to handle that last, 3.5 minutes, that would be great.
All right, we'll do. All right, 3, 2. Welcome back to the Heart of Innovation. Dr. Jim Joye here with Dr. Chris Bruce, and of course, Kym McNicholas. And we've just kind of walked through an amazing procedure, true cutting edge work. And one cannot help but wonder, where do we go from here? Having been through this process a number of times, I know it's sometimes faster to get from idea to that first go round. I'm just wondering, Dr. Bruce, where your heads are at, your team's heads at with regards to how can we take this from where we are to something that's commercially available, something that can be offered to obviously a broader group of patients in need.
Absolutely. And again, that is the drive of everybody that works in this collaboration. We've several procedures beforehand where we do this kind of practice of medicine, get patients out of trouble, and then see some of them don't have a commercial option, right? They're just not a commercially viable entity with a small patient population. But in this case, I can see calcified ostial lesions. So where the artery comes off the aorta, we try to stent it, and sometimes the stents fracture, sometimes they don't take very well in expansion. It could be used for that. Yes, same technique, perhaps with a different graft, could be used for more traditional coronary bypass grafting. I think it'll be hard to beat a Lima, but I don't think it's going to be too hard to beat a vein graft. So, we could imagine a world where you can have a robotic off-pump Lima to LAD and then vector grafts to the circumflex and right. Those kind of things we're thinking. But it's going to take a lot of work, as you say. We have done this in another patient. We did both arteries. So, it's the patients are out there. It's going to take a few more to get more refined at it. And yes, it would be great. And the wheels are turning, the cogs are turning anyway, as to how to make this a more commercially viable solution, more user-friendly, shall we say.
Yeah, well, that's the key. I mean, doing it is one thing in a 7 or 8 hour procedure, but breaking it down to something that can be done in 90 minutes in kind of anybody's hands is really the challenge. But
yeah,
my hat's off to you and your team for this major accomplishment. Necessity being the heart of innovation. You certainly exemplified that here, and it was great to hear your thoughts on just the human side of this, because you're absolutely right about the patients, and you obviously have the ability to speak to them and explain to them and provide the information that allows them to make a decision that they feel confident in.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to tell our story. And I just want to, again, thank everybody involved in our collaboration, Adam, Vasilis, Robert, some others that were involved along the way, Toby Rogers, Jaffer Khan, and all the team at the NIH and at Emory. So it's been a pleasure.
But thank you from the bottom of my heart for truly practicing medicine and advancing care and not settling for what evidence now says, but being a part of creating the new evidence that could shape or reshape the future of cardiac care for our patients. And thank you, Dr. Joye, for pinch hitting from Golden State Heart and Vascular here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Dr. John Phillips off saving some piggies. So thank you both for joining us. And make sure, if you're listening on the radio, go to youtube.com/the outside, the heart of innovation for more.